In today's video, we are looking at one player from each VCT Americas team that will have a breakout year in 2025. Each one of these players is talented, but maybe we haven't seen the full extent of their potential, and these are the players that I'm predicting are going to show that potential. So this is the board we have today. In the previous video, we talked about players that will have bounce back seasons, and just like that video, we will be going in alphabetical order, so we're starting with 100 Thieves. 100 Thieves' 2024 VCT season was one where they showed a lot of promise, but didn't make it to every international, only making it to VCT Master Shanghai, but getting top 4 in that tournament. So what you do with the roster in the offseason is kind of a big question. Does 100 Thieves management believe in the roster that they had? Do they think that they can win a championship? So what they ended up doing is keeping the same exact roster, but they did switch out their smokes player because Bang ended up leaving, which means that their new player in Xander is going to have a lot to prove. Xander has been a very solid tier 2 player for quite a long time, playing on the M80 roster for the past 2 seasons, and also having a career in Valorant before the switch to the VCT franchise system, playing on teams like V1, so Xander does have a lot to prove, and I think he's going to be given the space to. Xander has been very solid for M80, so moving on to this 100 Thieves roster after, just getting shy of ascending, I think Xander is going to have a really good year, and I think with the coaching staff there, I think he should be poised for a breakout year. Moving on, we have the newest team that is joining the VCT Americas through the Ascension program, and that is 2Game Esports. A team that kind of came out of nowhere in that America's Ascension tournament, but showed a lot of promise with a really good crop of young players. Unfortunately, one of their players in Spike is not eligible to play in the VCT because he's not of age. So he would probably be my pick in that case, but since he won't be joining the roster until about halfway through the season, I decided to go with Silence. He had a very good Ascension tournament, being a kind of Sentinel duelist flex player. He was fantastic, and one of the main reasons why 2Game ended up having the crazy tournament that they did to be in this position. Playing a bit of Jet as well as Cypher and Raze, a very flexible player who should be poised to have a pretty good year. I'm very curious to see how far 2Game can go. I don't really expect the roster to beat out G2 to stay in the Americas next year, but crazier things have happened. We'll see how far they can go, but if they end up going far, it will be because of Silence. Moving on, we have C9, a team that brought in some new players for this offseason. Early returns haven't been great, but it is the offseason, so losing in the Sin City Classic is really not that big of a deal, but I do still have quite a bit of faith in Vic. I think C9 picking up Vic is a very good move. He was quite good for MXS in the North American Challengers League, and I think that he will be able to translate it to Tier 1 success. It is kind of interesting because he goes from one team in MXS that has fallen at the big moments, and now he's going to C9, a team that does that just on the Tier 1 level. So if C9 is going to break out of their choking ways, it's going to be off the back of Oxy most likely, and they're going to need their support players to be very solid as well. And I do think Vic has that ability. We will see how it goes. Moving on, we have Evil Geniuses, a team that has a roster that is a far cry from what they had in 2023, which won champions. At this point, they're basically a team full of reclamation projects, players that maybe haven't had the opportunity, maybe players that have had careers that have gone by the wayside. You think of players like Ye in this respect, but one player that had a pretty solid bounce back season last year after having a really not good 2023 season was Derek. Derek, early in his Valorant career on 100 Thieves, looked like he was going to be a really solid player for a long time. And then in 2023, 100 Thieves were bad. Derek had a pretty bad year for himself, and the team ended up putting him off the roster during the offseason. So it was kind of surprising when EG ended up picking him up, but he was at that point a budget player that they could pick up for probably not that much. And Potter did a really good job to have Derek have a bounce back year. Was he fantastic? No. So he was good enough to not look out of place, which is very important for a player like him. So I think now that he's had that bounce back year, I think this year can be his breakout year. EG, I still don't like the org for what they did in 2023 after winning the championship, basically telling all their players that won them the championship that they weren't going to be able to pay them well and that y'all should just leave. So really don't like what they did there, but their new roster on paper, I do like it, and I want to see them do well. I want Ye to have a good year. I want Derek to have a good year. I think that EG potentially could be a surprise team in the Americas next year. And if that's going to happen, Derek's going to have a breakout year, and I think he has one in him. Moving on, we have Furia, a team that really was not very good last year. They are making some changes to their roster. Their new roster doesn't look fantastic either. I really don't have a lot of faith in them. However, one player that I could see potentially having a pretty solid year is Khalil. During the 2024 season, a lot of the time Noswer was Furia's best player. Kind of surprising it wasn't MW Zera, but I don't really have a lot of faith in MW Zera anymore. But Khalil had a pretty decent year for himself overall, especially during Stage 2 when Furia was actually a pretty decent team. So if there is one player that is going to drag them out of the mud, I think Khalil has a pretty decent shot at doing that. He is a talented player. There is talent on that Furia team. They just haven't been able to put it together. We will see if that changes, and if it does, Khalil would probably be leading the charge. Moving on to G2, a lot of players on their roster last year had breakout years. They did get top 3 at Masters Shanghai. They made it to champions. Earlier exit than what they would have wanted, but still, they are a very solid team. They bring in Jogmo now, who I did not put down on this board because I felt like he's had multiple breakout years at this point. So I decided to go with a player who does have a pretty long career in Valorant at this point, and that is Leaf. Now, Leaf had a good year for himself as well. He was their Sentinel player. He started as their Duelist player, but they ended up switching him to Sentinel because they liked how he played, and it worked out quite well for him. But I think with Leaf, we've seen him be like one of, if not the top player in the Americas, even just as short ago as 2023. Yes, C9 didn't go far in playoffs or anything, but if you look at Leaf's stats during Stage 1 of last year, during the regular season, Leaf was quite good. So we've seen flashes of him being a really good top player, and I think that if G2 goes really far, Leaf can absolutely have a breakout year. He was really solid for them last year, but I still think he has more in the tank, and I think we're going to see it this year. I have a lot of faith in this G2 roster. We will see how it plays out. Moving on, we have Crew. And unlike last video, we're going to be talking about a player that is actually still on the roster, and that is Shy. Shy has been a really solid player for Crew since he joined the roster. Valorant being one of the only games that he actually has played, so it's very impressive that he has reached the level that he has while not really being that big of a gamer before playing this game. So he's just kind of one of those guys that is just naturally very talented at this game, and it's great to see. Shy had a pretty solid year for Crew last year, being one of their better players. I think, you could make the argument that he's like their second best player behind Kesnet. Now that Mazzino's in the roster, we'll see if Mazzino can maintain the top level of play that he had on Leviathan. But I think if Crew is going to fix their consistency issues, which they had a ton of last year, I think Shy is going to have to put up consistently very solid performances. Not that that's anything new for him. He is a very good player, and I think just with his talent and with his story, with his ability, I think Shy is gonna be really good for them next year. I really want to see Crew break out. Now they have an IGL that hopefully is going to stay their IGL for the whole season. Swapping IGLs multiple times throughout the year and having roster changes during the year, that was definitely very tough on Crew and did not help their consistency. They looked really good at some points and then bowed out at the big moments, and then they made it to champs because they always do, and then they just didn't do much at champs again. So if they're going to change that, if they're going to actually have a good year at champs, Shy is going to have to be a star player for him, and I think that he has it in him. Moving on, we have Leviathan, a team that has gone through some pretty sweeping changes, losing their 2 best players in Ospos and Mazzino to other teams. 2024 was basically Leviathan's best season as a team in Valorant. Having as much talent as they did last year, they were able to get top 4 at champions, but still ultimately fell short of expectations. So if they're going to be able to both maintain that level of play without those star players, I think Kane is going to have to be very good for them. Kane is one of those players that I feel like goes under the radar a lot. He is their IGL, and I don't think people see him as like a top IGL in the world. I think overall his calling is very solid, but we don't think of him as like an FNS who was able to win championships and get to grand finals. But what I do like about Kane and his game is that when you compare his individual performance to other IGLs, he is better than a lot of them. Not only was he one of Leviathan's best players, he was one of the best players in the entire VCT Americas. You could make the argument for most of the year that Kane was their second best player right behind Ospos. Yes, you could put Mazzino there as well, but I think Kane is a bit more valuable than Mazzino. So the fact that he's staying on this roster and he's going to have a whole new crop of players to deal with, like Demon 1, I think if they're going to maintain the level of play that they had last year and potentially improve on it, Kane is going to have to put up some pretty solid numbers, and I think he's going to because he did it last year. We'll see if they keep him on that smokes roll. I think that's probably where he's best fit. I definitely think that he has a breakout year in him. I hope he is able to improve on not just his own ability, but his IGL skills as well. Moving on, we have Loud, a team that used to be one of the big dogs in Valorant, but last year was their worst season in the game. They ended up only making one international. They did get top 4 at Madrid, but there was only 8 teams and they only beat China teams. So Loud were not able to do what they were hoping to do last year, which was absorb the loss of Ospos and still put together a really solid roster. That did not happen last year, and now they have lost more players. Sadok is now gone, as well as Les. So they've lost their star IGL, who individually maybe isn't the best performer, but still can put us some really solid games. And then they lose Les, who arguably and statistically was probably their best player last year. So while that is a very unfortunate loss for this team from a roster standpoint, it might allow some of the players that are sticking on the roster room to grow, room to improve their own game, and I think if there's one player that can do that, I do think it's Tui's. Even though Loud wasn't great last year, Tui's overall had a pretty good year for himself. I think the one issue that he faced was the fact that they put him on other roles, like they tried him on Duelist and whatnot, and he didn't have the greatest games on Duelist. He has the skill for it, but I think overall it's best if you keep him on that smokes role. Tui's came into the roster after Loud won Champions, and then they almost won lock-in with him, so he has not been a part of a championship winning roster on Loud, and I don't think that this is the year where that happens. But if Loud is going to have a bounce back year from what they had in 2024, which I think is pretty unlikely, it's going to have to be Tui's stepping up big. They still have Pancada and Kawazine. Digizin looks like he's joining the roster as well. There is some potential here with this roster, but I don't overall. There is some potential with this roster, but overall I just think it's a shame that this org seems to not be putting in the effort to build a championship winning roster like they used to. If they're going to find success, it's going to have to be from those players that have been on this roster for a while. Moving on, we have MIBR, a team that got some pretty big fish in the offseason. They did end up getting Ospos after he won it out of Leviathan, so that's a very big get for them. They also bring in Noswer, who was supposed to be playing with Ospos last year on Leviathan, but got kicked off the roster in favor of Com. So those two players I think are going to be their best two, but in terms of the rest of the roster, we have seen like the leaked version of the roster. So overall, if this team is going to be good, it's going to have to be the rest of their team, aside from Ospos and Noswer, improving a lot on what they've had. MIBR has not been a very good team in Valorant during their time, especially in the franchise league, so they're going to want to change that if they want getting these new players to be worth it. So I think one player that I think has the potential to really step up is Artsin. Artsin at points was one of MIBR's best players last year, not having the best year overall, and his roles were kind of in a blender. We saw him on Duelist as well as like Smokes and Sentinel, but now he's definitely not going to be the Duelist player, with Ospos being the clear choice for that. I think Artsin has a pretty solid chance at having a really good year for MIBR. He will be learning from some of the game's greats, having the support system of Ospos and Noswer. Those are two players that you can definitely play off of, and if MIBR is going to make getting these big fish worth it, Artsin's going to have to step his game up, and I think that he absolutely can. Moving on to Energy, we have one of their new additions, and that is Mata. Mata was really good for Energy in the Sin City Classic tournament, showing some incredible skill. He was very good for MXS last year, I think, in terms of getting from Tier 2 duelists in North America. He was definitely the best choice. And now he's going to be learning from the likes of FNS and Ethan, two players that have been around the game and esports in general for a very long time. So that's an incredible support system. He seems to have a lot of chemistry with Verno as well. So all signs point to Mata having a breakout year for Energy and hopefully dragging this team out of the mud that they found themselves in last year. Energy being one of the bigger North American orgs, they definitely wanted their roster last year to do a lot better than what they ended up doing, but I think they made some crucial mistakes in the roster construction, like not having a set IGL aside from Ethan, having FNS and Som not return. Whether or not that was their choice or the team's choice doesn't really matter. They clearly would have played because they eventually came back. So now that they've taken their time with their roster, they're letting this cook, they're letting this one sit, they're letting the chemistry build, and they're not just going off of what's the biggest name we can get. They got Mata, they got Verno, they got a new coach, and I think that all signs point to this team being really good next year, and Mata is going to have to show that. Moving on to our last player, we have Sentinels. Sentinels had a lot of breakout seasons in 2024 for their players. Zekin, Tens, Jonghyun, all these players having arguably the best years of their career. You could put Zelsis in that conversation as well, so I ended up going with one of their new additions, and that was Bang. Bang has been on 100 Thieves for quite a long time at this point and hasn't really shown himself at the international stage that much. He did have the option of returning to 100 Thieves, but he opts to go to Sentinels, and I think that this is a really good move for his career. He gets to go to one of, if not the biggest brand in Valorant, at least in North America, a team that really wants to win, a team that proven that they can, and a team with a lot of talent overall. So for Bang, if he wants to show Sentinels that it was worth bringing him in, he's going to have a breakout year. One thing I want to see from Bang in 2025 is a lot more diversity. I think he plays for clutches a lot, and he is a pretty solid smokes player overall, but maybe we see him on more than just a couple smokes agents. Sentinels roles at this point are a little bit concerning from what we saw in the Sen City Classic, but it is the offseason, they're just trying things out. But Bang is definitely going to be the resident smokes player, so if he wants to prove some of the Sentinels fans right, I saw some people saying that he's gonna prove that he's the best smokes player in the world. That's a lot to ask. Is that potential there? Maybe. I think he's a really good smokes player, but I hesitate to say he would be the best. But hey, maybe Sentinels win a couple trophies this year and he puts himself firmly in that spot. The potential is there for Bang. I hope he does well on Sentinels because replacing Tens is no easy feat, but he is a bit more of a traditional smokes player rather than Tens, who was mainly just playing Omen, but also could flex to some other agents on other roles. So for Bang being a bit more of a traditional smokes player, maybe it ends up being an improvement on that role overall from Tens. Not that he's going to be better than Tens, I'm not expecting that. Tens had very good chemistry with Zekin, which really helped Zekin as well. But for Bang, I think he has the potential to break out in 2025 and really show the whole Valorant world what he's made of. We will see. I just want his overall game to be a little bit better than what we've seen on 100 Thieves. We've seen him be really good, but I want him to, be a bit more of a presence out there. So those are all 12 players that I wanted to talk about today. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think of this list. Which players from each team would you put on a list like this? Let me know in the comments down below. Please click like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.